Okay, I don't know whether to call this one global warming my ass or watch out America or watch out world, but I think we're deceiving ourselves. And I do want to admit straight off the bat that surely we're causing something with our global warming. Surely cow farts are building up and causing a problem. Methane, all these other things that seem to be driving this that we see. And interestingly, if you look into the history of the ice cores of the planet that we've tested, we find that we've gone through ice ages quite a few times now. And, when the idea first came about, we realized we were warming up and the continental ice shelves and so on had receded. Now we realize that they've done this over and over a few times, and it's probably the engine that drove the evolution that happened on the planet from the dinosaurs. I mean, you have a epoch, and then an ice age, and an epoch, and then an ice age, and an epoch, and then an ice age, and then us. And we came out of the last ice age kind of ugh, and apparently thousands, 10,500 years later, or a little more, we're still trying to figure it all out. And one can see why people would invoke God on this. Why, Ugg people wouldn't be able to understand how simple things like snow happens and how water can turn to ice and then back. They don't have a concept of freezing point. They do have an idea when it gets cold, this is when it happens, and whenever it doesn't, it doesn't. But other than that, we probably don't have very much of a good idea of anything at that point. And we invoke things. We invoke the fact that it's magic that water can become solid and then go back to its own form in water. In fact, we can heat it up and then it becomes steam and that becomes clouds, and people starts making up things, and on how it all works. And clearly, I think now we finally have figured out the truth to the Bible. And if you'll watch a couple of my videos, like Josephus, a Flavian liar, or the white elephant in the room, or white elephant in the Bible, those will be some pointers, but I'm coming out with some real good ones here. At first, I was trying to just lead people towards information, and then they would find it. Now I'm starting to just go ahead and come out with the information because it's starting to be well known. And because of that, it's time for it to all just go ahead and happen. And what fears me, though, is that there's all these beliefs in the world, not even attached to religion, like global warming. And I believe global warming to be somewhat true. I think that we are having an effect on our planet somewhat. But let's look at something. Let's look at the effects of the last ice age and when it happens, and doing core samples all over the planet, how they correlate together, and see if we can get any information out of that. Clearly, science is what's leading us towards answers. And as we do, we're finding out that there's not a plastic bubble over the earth, and that it's not flat, and that there's a whole nother side to the earth, and that's not the underworld with all the underworld creatures in hell, but it actually had America on it. And that wasn't the underworld at all. Original concepts, people, by the way, of underworld was just below the equator and above the equator. The land below, the land above. They knew where the middle of the world was. They made an omphalos stone called the belly button of the world and knew where it was. The old story behind this, which sounds oddly like a round world, was that Zeus had let loose two birds, and then they flew around and landed, and wherever they landed, that's where they put the omphalos stone, because they knew that would be the center of the world. Of course, that's kind of a funny thing. You'd have to find its center kind of up and down, left and right from some point, and then let them loose, and they would go around, one on the left, one on the right, and end up meeting on the other side, and where they met would be it. So this says that Zeus actually came over here to someplace off the California coast and did it, and then boom, right on the other side of the world, that's where they met at. There's an ancient story, though, about Enki having done the same thing, that he traveled both directions. Now, it's odd. If you look at their model, people always say, oh, it's round, because there's this one tablet that shows water encircling their little area there. Well, that's just way out of scale. And I'm not sure that's trying to say all of that, that people try to give credit to. It could actually be the moat that ran around the whole thing, and it's looked at as that was probably the original idea of Atlantis. Right, and the reason it's been fooling us the whole time is because we thought Rome was so much more advanced at the time that they got the information. But had they have gotten the information 600, 800, 1,000 years before, which does seem like that's what they referred to, or thousands of years before, that they wouldn't have been in their position. And whenever they talk about this ancient race that had all this shit going on, that could have been that had much more going on mathematically, irrigation, all of the advancements that are there. Clearly we can see now when we look at that they had routed the rivers to run through the actual compound and had put walled things around it, and you could get in through the waterways. And of course that kind of became their downfall, because whenever they tried to lock everybody out during a big siege, they were able to come in through those waterways, and that looked like that was the downfall of when the Akkadians took over. But I'm deviating way off of this. But I want you to know ancient men used to worship the sun. It's one of the first things I can find in any symbolism whatsoever, and I can find where people have figured out where the sun was casting through a hole against a wall, inside of a cave or against a wall, where they marked it with soot marks or scratch marks going all the way down and then turning around and coming all the way back up. A few of these have marks at the bottom, sideways, horizontal, letting you know there's the bottom of it there. And so people would know when the end of winter was coming and back even then. And it makes this funny bowling pin type shape whenever it does it, and it seems like that the summer part's a little bit less than the winter part. But I think we know now that that's because we come closer to the sun, believe it or not, during winter, and farther away during summer, although we are facing more head-on at it and less angles. And I'm not sure if everybody listening now notices or knows or figures in the fact that whenever the northern part of the world here, like England and America and China and Russia, are in their winter, that South America and Brazil and Australia are in their summer, that it's actually the middle of their summer. When we hit our winter solstice, they're actually hitting what would be their summer solstice. It's not winter all over the planet. It's winter flopping up and down, and it's due to our wobble and twisting. But I digress. Let's look at some of these charts that show you the polar ice shelf and global warming, because what we're getting now as projections is things like this from people, where it says we're getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and here's 3 or 4 different guys' projections, and we could end up being not 1, 2, 3, but 4 or 5 degrees more. And you think 5 degrees isn't that much, but in an overall scheme of things, it pretty much ruins away winter, where we don't have the freezing of winter and killing off all the insects and things, and then summer is going to be actually so devastating that middle of summer is going to cook most of our vegetation on the planet, and it's going to cause problems and more droughts than it normally should. And I think we're seeing that effect somewhat in America, and I bet it's happening all over the world with this drought that happens because of this type of effect. You'll end up with something that very much does that to a lake bed. Here is a place that used to be a lake bed for hundreds and hundreds of years. Ever since America was founded, there was a small thin lake here that you could almost walk across. It went over your head a little bit and then went out the other side. It didn't get more than about 25, 30 foot deep, but it did cover about 600 acres and run into another pond that carried almost as much, and all of that's gone now, and that's because of a drought in the area. So everybody wants to blame it on industrialization like this, and that they're putting the gases in the air. Well, this is really just steam, but there's some crap in that steam, and that's pollution. That's call it smog, I guess you'd say. It's causing all of that. And that smog is causing more of our problem. And you look at some of these big industrial areas like in China and stuff, and you can see that that's really causing a lot of problem. And one thing we've realized now that we realize the Earth is a much smaller place is that that fog that's coming out of them spends a little time over that continent, but then gets pushed over all the way around the world, and so on. And so I fart over here, you smell it over there. It just takes a long time to get there. And that's not really, it's definitely odd to think about how much that it has that effect, where people used to say, a butterfly bats its wings, and when a butterfly bats its wings, it can make something happen all the way across the planet. And indeed it can. So let's look at IceAge charts and see if I can get this thing to work right. I don't know why it's back kicking on me so bad, but IceAge charts. So here's the way that it's gone over the last few IceAges, right? You can see this information here and how we're hitting different peaks. And as it goes through warm phases and ice phases and warm phases and ice phases. And you can see it doing it kind of like a wave. Like in this picture, let's just look at that. You can see it doing it in a wave effect. And the reason we know that it must be true is that we're finding many different areas. Here they compare Epica and Vostok together, and they really mimic each other pretty hard. There's slight differences, jags up here that don't show down there, but when you look at it, it really is that same heartbeat going over and over again. This little part's a little different than there, and I think you're going to see in that little spot where everything warms up different things in different spots, because one is closer to the area that it happens and not. And you can see the ice volume here, how it goes up and down and up and down. So the waterways go up and down, up and down. And you're looking at these staggers here, and they appear to be somewhere around 150,000 years apart, where they're just pegging each other here. Something odd happened at last one that we had, where we had a younger Dryas event, and I still honestly think that that was a asteroid hitting us and probably causing the flood that everybody seems to remember, but it didn't happen 4,000 years ago. The flood that's in the Bible was a localized flood. The big flood that happened to everything came out of the last ice age, when people were much closer to the shores that are non-existent now for it melting. But here's what I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can show one that gives you a better view of it here, but let's just look at the very first one that'll show up. In these, you can see that there are data that are thin-lined, and then it starts to become thicker, and then it starts to become much thicker and scribbled, much thicker and scribbled. And what is this? Well, we've got much more information from here than we do there, and when you overlay it, it just becomes a darker and darker line. It doesn't even get outside of itself. This is another proof. But one thing I want you to notice, that these intervals are coming at a pretty even rate here. There's a little slight difference between this interval and the one before and the one after. And there's a longer interval here, it almost seems, than anywhere else. One thing also I would like to show you is that every ice age seems to come on pretty damn fast, and then when it goes away, the temperature goes back up real quick. Goes back up real quick. Goes back up real quick. But it doesn't spend a long amount of time up, does it? Then, once it gets up, it staggers its way back down and falls back down, and here we go through another ice age. It looks like this one, and this one, and this one. Well, let's look at ourselves here. Does anybody notice the fact that before humans were on the planet, that it got warmer than it is now? Does anyone see that correlated data there? That if I go straight across from where we are now, there I'm about the right height, that actually it got much hotter. In fact, the point that people are like, oh no, watch, it's going to get up this hot. Well, it looks like without any industrialness, it did it here before humans were on the planet, and here, not quite as high, but in here, and look how much higher than my blue mark it is. You can see that, right? And so, what makes us think that it's not supposed to go up here to that 4 number? That it's not supposed to go up a little bit higher? And then what it's going to do is drop off real rapidly and get cold. And everybody's like, global warming, global warming, global warming. And we're going to look like assholes when all of a sudden it becomes, oh, next ice age, watch out. And I think we need to try to figure out what we can do to prepare for it, because once the, continental ice shelves encroach in, here, let me give you a visual on this if I can. Continental ice shelf. Let's see if I can see some old. here it is all melting away, and everybody wants to show you pictures of it and the edges of it and how it's going away, and icebergs and melting, and how it's undercutting and releasing icebergs. And you can get a lot of information out of this. You can look around at icebergs and things like that. But one thing that I'm trying to find global, and I'm not seeing what I'm talking about here, is the way that the planet used to look whenever it was the last ice age. So let me just see if I can continental ice age. Oh, well, it's going to show me the damn movie. Global. And earlier I had a perfect picture to show you this type of thing, but now I've seemed to have lost it, and I'm just going to try to grab something like I do and randomize it. But so you can see how these continents used to apparently have glaciers all over them. Let's see if I can pull this in for you. Had glaciers all over them, and the whole of Canada, all the way down into North America, Boston, New York, dipping into half of North America, top third was a glacier. There were glacier sets over the other sides of the mountains in South America. Europe was under this. I believe the top of Russia was too at the same time. But this encroaches in. This white area here at the bottom is going to end up making you see how the ground and then the ice is around it, the extra white. Well, that's going to grow and actually come over and try to meet that. And whenever it does, it stops the ocean just a little bit and causes another issue, by the way. And you could get things that ruin the current in between here by getting this frozone over enough to stop it. Well, the area that's going to be good after this next ice age is only going to be what's right here in the center of the earth. Only in this area. It's not going to, when this crouches down from about the top of my pointer here to about right in here, is going to be where people are able to live at. It's going to cut out about a third of the living space on the planet. And whenever it does, we're going to be in trouble somewhat. But there's an answer to this. Africa is going to re-fertilize itself during this and become a land of plenty again, and milk and honey, along with all the way across the equator. The places that now are all becoming a desert are going to resaturate themselves and become the best place for there to be food at. And of course, above and below are going to be frozen out areas and not good. And this is going to happen fairly soon. If we look back at that chart there, it looks like we're overdue. It really looks like we're overdue. Let me try to go back to this one more time. And so, let's look at this. Okay, so it looks to me, see if I can make this a little larger, really get to where you can see it. How about that? This is another version of the Epica Vostok information that's here. But if you'll look, it spins a peak that's not very long and dips. A peak that's not very long and dips. A peak that's not very long and dips. And here we are stretching this fact out, where if you look at even the exaggerated not go down fast version, how it goes about this far, right here, and has dipped below this line, whereas we're riding that line. And how long have we been riding that line? It's as thick right here as it is right there, and thicker here than it is here, or here, and perhaps here are about equal to it now. So the longest form and the longest time duration we can find on our planet has only this amount of warmth versus a little bit, pretty good, and then now. And if we compare this little point where it dips down and goes zoom, dips and goes zoom, is right here on this line, people. And Al Gore is going to look like a fool here. Well, he's probably going to be passed away. I mean, everybody thinks, oh, it's going to happen tomorrow. But it's going to happen within the next few hundred years. And whenever it does, it's going to dip down and we're going to lose 6 or 8 degrees. And you're like, oh, well, that's no big deal. Yeah, it is, because that's what forms the ice ages all the way through. It's not all the way down. The world doesn't get to 32 degrees, people. It's just as it encroaches in on the planet, the places that would have been 55 are now 35. The places that were going to barely make it to close to 35 are now frozen. So it's going to be a pivots like that. And everybody keeps worrying about global warming. And it's possible that what we're doing here is actually holding it off for as long as possible. And it might actually be a good thing. It's entirely possible that another 10,000, 20,000 years from now, whenever we start to run through the same situation and warm up and people start freaking out, that scientists then will be saying, no, 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 we figured it out last time, and while we were sitting there whining about how it got warm, that it had already happened 20 times before that, and really no worry. The worry is that it jagged back and got cold to us and almost killed off all of the people on the planet because we were idiots and weren't awaiting it. And then people are going to say, why weren't you awaiting it? Well, half of the people on the planet, or about 60% back then, believed that the world was going to end because they still believed in the Bible. You're going to have to tell people then to look up the Bible and stuff and how it got found out in the year 2017 through 2020 that Titus Flavius and his little assistant there, known as Josephus, actually wrote, along with Greek scholars, wrote the Bible and the stories of Jesus Christ. This information is out now. Take a look at my videos on the subject. And also, the truth to who the Hebrews were worshiping has also come out. And amazingly, it was Saturn. And it's the reason that the Romans, you wonder why the Romans would grab something like that and pull it into their pantheon, but they realized that they too were worshiping Saturn. Or the Old Testament was also written by the Greeks. One of these two things is in effect. But the one thing that's not in effect is the God of the Hebrew Bible being the actual creator of the world or have any influence over anything whatsoever. In fact, all of this is naturally happening to our planet, whether the little creatures on there believed in some God or not. You see, back in the old times, they used to really pray through the winter to make it warm back up. Do you nowadays believe that that's what caused that jig-jag right there? Lots of praying. Well, if you believed it happened last time, that's okay, but since people weren't on the planet the one before that, what caused that? Or the one before? Or the one before? Are you going to invoke that dinosaurs were able to do this, or that God was there making it happen before, like a heartbeat? You know, and one thing's for sure, the Earth's not 4,000 BC or 6,000 years old, but so much more older than that, even if we're totally wrong on our radiocarbon dating. If we were off by a factor of 100,000, the Earth would still be 480,000 years old? 420? Not 6,000? If we were off by that much, and by the way, there hasn't been a mathematical calculation, I don't believe, in modern time, other than by an idiot or somebody with bad data, that has been off by anywhere close to that number whatsoever. And time will tell us from this point here, which this was recorded in 2017, that that is the truth. And if you'll look, I'm thinking somewhere in about 20 to 60 years that it's going to dip down and everybody's going to go, wow, even though we're trying to make it warm, it's not making it warm. And then we're going to try to do something to make it hold off that ice age. And we're going to go into polluting the air and doing things to try to help us through the next ice age. Isn't that funny? How all of a sudden we're going to go, oh, whoa, and start changing around and doing different things. Yeah, this is what's going to happen. Because this continental ice sheet is going to come back over these areas. And you can tell by this, nobody in Canada is going to be in Canada anymore. They're actually going to have to come down into North America. A lot of people that are living in any area that you see frosted over are going to have to come into the other areas. And it's going to make the world much smaller, with a much larger population than people are giving credit for. And this will be the coming together of mankind as one, because we have no choice. We'll be all of a sudden squinched. And things better work out pretty good during that time. I foresee that people are going to try to cause wars and minimize the population to take the strain off the population that's there. And that's going to be disgusting as hell. And if today we were all working on this, instead of 60% of the people believing that it's all going to end in a couple of weeks anyhow because God's going to ruin the world, because the Hebrew tent people had the idea, then, maybe we could actually get something done. Anyhow, I'm about through with my little tirade on this, but global warming and Al Gore. And watch, I've got another video on it from not too long ago, but I couldn't keep myself again from looking at that data and just thinking to ourselves, as we're coming into winter right now, it's almost Christmas here, that, what's the trend? And what does it all mean for everybody? And then it kicked in the old thoughts about sun worship and how it all works. And that ends up giving us the end of the way things go. And, as DeGrasse Tyson says, quoting, I believe, somebody from, I'm not going to try to say who he quoted, but he says, the Bible tells how to get to heaven, but it doesn't tell how the heavens go. I may have messed that up just a little bit, but anyhow, you get the idea. I appreciate y'all. And let me show you one more thing here. Let's look at the Southern Cross. The Southern Cross constellation tells a lot, because at winter solstice the sun comes down and hovers right near this thing for 3 days and then rises back up. And it's something that primordial men had figured out, and the ancient Sumerians. The sun seems to die on December 21st, and then it arises on December 25th, 3 days later. And that's the reason that we have Jesus and Christmas and everything on this, is he's the arising sun god that warms the planet again. And if you look at Mithra and where this all comes from, and he's a sun god, that's where everything twists together. And all of this was just Rome adopting in, as they always did, into their pantheon, everything that was around them and everyone else's belief as being, yeah, that's part of it too. That's part of it too. Only it backfired on them, and then they all got destroyed and Rome fell, and they weren't able to make the next little story that was supposed to come in the next 300 to 500 years. They never were able to do it, and we've been stuck on this one ever since. Look up my videos. Look through them here at the top. Click videos and go through it, and just see if anything grabs your attention, and then you might find that other ones will grab your attention too. I appreciate y'all. Take care.